Good evening and welcome to the Velocity of Now. It's December 17th, 2014. Actually, it's 18th in this part of the world. We had a bit of a, shall we say, an attack right before we went on air, which seems to be happening a lot when I go on the air lately. So whether it's up to somebody at the gremlins in the Pentagon or whatever, I don't know. But I hope you can hear the signal nice and clear. You can hear me speaking nice and clear, and my voice is coming through nice and clear. And during the show, I may have to restart the microphone or restart Skype, but we'll see if we can get through it. Anyway, it's December 17, 2014. As I said, you're welcome to the Velocity of Now. At me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. This is the second show after my sort of voluntary, involuntary sabbatical, should we say, and the numbers for last week's show were fantastic. Apparently the show was a huge hit, off the ground, up and running, so thank you for that. Thank you for Paula and Neil at Reality Bytes who are doing the production tonight and setting it up and making me feel all nice and comfortable and everything, and Anne there in the background who arranges everything. And we are welcoming a new shall we say broadcast affiliate. Wow, I've always wanted to say that. It sounds like so American, but like our new broadcast affiliate. Our new broadcast affiliate is Para X Station, www.parax.com, which are going to be broadcasting the repeats of this show on Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern in the US, so I get a nice big primetime audience. So my website is www.thomassheridanarts.com, and the podcast, the podcasts I make to go with this show, they'll appear in the next couple of days or maybe a little later on www.newsymbolsmedia.tv, which is an interesting little website I put together for basically kind of media things. I did I found a good little section there this week on the function of the runes in Nordic society, and particularly the cult. Well, I would say the cult. Let's be honest and give the man or the deity some respect. The religion of Wotan, or Odin, as he was known, and how it has now been discovered that prior to Christianity, Wotan or Odin, or Wotan, whatever you want to call him in Anglo-Saxon, it was a far more popular and common deity than they had let us know. So that was the original god of Europe really was Odin, or Wotan. So I put that up on newsymbolsmedia.tv. Now, it's been an interesting week. I have loads of great stories for you. I'm always coming up with new things, and I wouldn't do this show if it wasn't interesting for me. And as usual, there's always something odd and strange comes up in the week. This week, a few people brought to my attention a music video by the world's first, this is what they call her, the world's first bionic pop artist. A young lady by the name of Victoria Modesta. And basically she's an amputee. She has one half her leg from the kneecap down missing. And normally I'd be like, good luck to her. That's fantastic that she's doing it in the music business, though it hasn't been the first time. Let's not kid ourselves. Rick Allen, the drummer from Def Leppard, lost his arm in a horrific car crash and managed to build himself a drum kit, and that he was using 2 foot pedals to compensate for the snare drum he was missing with his left arm. And he basically invented a new form of drumming to deal with his unfortunate disability that became an asset. And we also had Stevie Wonder and Ray Charles, who were both blind before that. So, of course, they're using all the usual cliches like it's groundbreaking or disability has been no disadvantage in pop music. But let's be honest here, it's been here before. But anyway, Channel 4, that station on the forefront of cultural Marxism, has put together a music video, and there was something on Sunday night the 14th where they basically broadcast a promo for her new video. It's a song called Prototype, and it's garbage. The song is absolute rubbish. It's the typical kind of Katy Perry, leave your brain at the door, meaningless pop music that has so many people and young people not interested in current pop music and running straight to the music that we grew up in instead, because it's so bad today in this like Simon Cowell era. Now, this the video is quite intense. It's repulsive, actually. It's repulsive. It has elements of disabled porn going on in it. It has a spike on her leg where her prosthetic foot would be, and then a kind of a bionic transhumanist foot. So it has a transhumanist aspect to it, which is disturbing. And it's bad enough that they're pushing transhumanism, but the style and the presentation of the video is quite dark and quite nauseating and quite pukey on every level. It reminds me of someone who looked at a Geiger painting and probably thought it was like the ideal way to live, or someone who looked at those kind of paintings from the Middle Ages, those religious paintings of people being flayed alive, or people on really horrific images of the crucifix, and decided to make a video based on that. By the way, did you know that most of the models used in many of the models that were used in the paintings during the Renaissance and the Middle Ages were actually dead bodies? All those cherubs that you see in those weird cherubs that you see in all those paintings with their eyes all strange and everything, a lot of them were actually dead babies that were like taken off the streets of Rome or Milan or Verona, wherever they could be found. They were taken off. They were just dead, and the artist would pay the mother whatever a fee to paint the baby as a cherub. That's why so many of them have weird faces and weird eyes, or so many baby Jesus don't look like they're alive when in paintings of the mother and the Madonna and Child from that era, because they actually was using a dead baby as a model. So it's always been a dark world that way. But this prototype video on Channel 4 is very much in that guise. It's not really empowering. It's not really empowering disabled people. And this woman, you want to like her, but I don't know. There's just something so unbelievably creepy about it. And I'm a bit angry at her because she's allowed herself to be exploited. She's allowing herself to be exploited, firstly by the transhumanist agenda, this idea of that we all should eventually become robots, and that's why Channel 4 carefully selected the title of their article as the world's first bionic pop star. And there's all kinds of S&M aspects to it as well. And well, this is the darkness I'm talking about. It's I spoke about last week. We're living in a very, very dark time, and the sensation of that at the moment is it's darker than ever, because we're kind of living in an age where at this time of year you can really feel the closing in, the closing in of the day, that the light is dying. There's the murder of the light is happening as we approach the winter solstice, and the day is reborn again after the solstice, and this kind of thing. And this is why it's good for us to go into the dark side, because that's the purpose of this. We're going into this. This is why they have Krampus, the satanic Santa in Central Europe. It's very important that right now, at this period, as we approach this what they call the season of goodwill, that we really, in reality it's not. A Coca-Cola commercial with a picture with Santa on it doesn't make this the season of goodwill. But we can feel that intensity, that closing down. There's a sense of psychic pressure, like we're being put under tremendous forces at the moment, that they're pushing down on us with this kind of darkness. But guess what? What comes out of, we are carbon-based life forms, and what comes out of us when they crush a piece of carbon? Well, you get a diamond. And that's what will happen to us. This is why it's important for me personally to continue on with this looking at the dark side, because I truly do believe that looking at the dark side of things, and I'm not, that doesn't mean I'm being a miserable sod or anything like that. It's nothing like that. It's we're looking for that diamond. We're looking for that pressure, the psychic pressure to put us under to create the diamond. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I find generally looking at the dark side of things yields much more valuable insight into the human condition than it does going all airy-fairy and new agey and all peace, love and light and all this kind of stuff. You don't get that stuff there. You get the stuff, you get the magic. You get the magic and you get the mysteries. It's easier for us in this earth at this time, in this development of humanity, to look at the dark side and to work with it. To try and find a resolution that brings us to better places, because it is dark out there. And I was just watching that video by, the bionic pop star, and thinking about that, how they're crushing us again. They're imposing this psychic vice upon us, and I mean vice in two ways, both in the Vice Squad and actually a vice on a welder's or a carpenter's bench, that they turn the handle, and that kind of thing. But that's okay. This is where we are, and this is where we're going, and revolution only takes you back to where you started, but insurgency doesn't. Insurgency is like a volcano exploding and all the new elements coming out of it. And that's why I much prefer the term insurgency than I ever will over revolution. Russell Brand is giving you a revolution. Thomas Sheridan is giving you insurgency. That's a big difference there when you start to understand these things. As small as I am, and as little known as I am, but this is what I do, and this is what I'm about. And I'm only here because I find this interesting, and I hope you find it interesting too. So we're in the dark night of the soul, and we're in the dark part of the year, and that's okay. That's okay. This is a good time for being creative. When you look back at these times in your life and you say, at the time it was horrible. I nearly said a bad word then. You see, I have the list of the 7 words I cannot say on American radio in front of me, and it's hard. I'm like a junkie who's like gone cold turkey, and there's a needle nearby full of smack, and I need it. I'm not going to do it because I'm better than that. I'm stronger than that. And what was that guy in Saturday Night Live? And gosh darn it, I can curse off air. Anyway. And that's important too, laughing at the dark side, laughing through the darkness, gallows humor, that kind of thing. Oh, gallows humor, I've got some good stories on that kind of thing. I've got a really, really good show tonight. Honestly, you're going to like tonight's show. I've been trawling through the archives of degeneracy and social madness to bring out things that are very important, because people think that what's going on today with the awakened community, these issues have only existed now. No way, folks. These issues have always been with us. We've always had to deal with these things one way or another, as Blondie said. Now, if any of you listen to Kira Young's show, The Bridge, it's a really good show, and goes out on Sundays, and it's repeated all over the place on podcast and on YouTube and all this things. She has a good show called The Bridge with Kira. She also runs a very good blog called Psychopaths in Charge, and she's one of the people I like listening to. It's a shame. No, there's quite a few shows I like listening to, but she's one of the regular ones. And well, Niall Murphy was before he went off the air on his little honeymoon of love. And good luck to Niall. And I like Carrie Lee and all the stuff she does, and the fantastic website she has on. I've forgotten the now. Sorry, I got a blank mind. It'll come to me on Anarchy. Somebody will type it into the Facebook page. But it's basically survival techniques, and no, I don't mean survival like in prepping techniques. I mean finding living in a kind of almost a homestead. Actually, that's kind of how I see Carrie Lee and Kira. They're almost like traditional homestead women from the olden times in America or in Canada or in Alaska, or in the native people who kept the family and the home together while the men went off and hunted or had to fight or something. And it's a much help. That's why I think I like their work so much, because it's kind of like the digital sort of virtual version of that. And it's important that we keep that archetype long. And they're two of the women I respect that do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sorry, feminists, if you think that's bad. It's more honour in that than being in a NATO helicopter gunship machine gunning women and children in a village because you're now an empowered female. It's much more healthy having these having the having a farm or the homestead taken care of. I'm not saying that the men go out. I'm not saying like that, but it's good. I just like to see that kind of aspect kept going. I don't know. Those Carrie Lee and Kira kind of personify that for me. So that's probably why I mentioned that on that tangent. Anyway, Kira Young of the Bridge brought a story up with me today. She posted it on her wall, and I tell you, I'm at that point where I don't, it takes a lot for my my jaw to drop these days, other than when I'm on, I get morphine from the dentist. But this is a story, you remember like in 1984, there was a scene in the book, and in it was done very well in the film version with John Hurt, where he's mending the neighbour's sink on their house as a sink blockage, and he's mending it in the apartment. And the two kids come over and they're in the junior spies. They're dressed as little Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, but they're spies. And the little boy goes over with a tie gun to Winston Smith, and he goes, "I'll shoot you, I'll vaporize you, I'll send you to the salt mines. You're a traitor, you're a thought criminal." Well, that's actually happening now. That's actually, this all began with these, I can remember back in the old days, they'd have like hotlines for kids could call if your parents were abusing you. And that's okay if they're really abusing you, but now this is all about using children to monitor their parents. This is the second stage of the psychopathic control grid. You remember I was talking about the Common Core. Well, Common Core, the first aspect of Common Core educational curriculum is to create a cultural and psychological gap, a cut-off point between the current children growing up, the current children entering school now, and the parents. The second stage, because they don't relate to each other, that's because they've given them a whole new cognitive mindset through this Common Core thing, and the kids won't be able to relate to the parents. The next stage of this will be having the children spy on the parents. It's already beginning. If you look shows like Peppa Pig, that horrible show, Peppa Pig, is so annoying. Yeah, the father in that show, well, I haven't seen it, but I've seen, reviews of it. The little girl in that show, just like Lisa Simpson with her father, the father's portrayed as a buffoon and an idiot. And, the father in Peppa Pig, he's incompetent and he's constantly corrected by the little daughter. "Silly, Daddy. Daddy is so silly. Daddy is silly." Which is, this is the whole kind of thing. And he goes, "Oh, I'm such a doofus. Oh, this kind of thing." And it's like, "Don't," like Homer Simpson. It's the same thing. The destruction of the male archetype father figure, and this is all part of the split, the gap, the fracture. That's a good way of putting it. The gulf that's been ripped apart between generations in order to turn the generations who are entering school now against their parents. And there's a story in the Washington Post that was brought to me today, as I said, by Kira, and the story, and people are going to go, "Oh, but the Washington Post, it's a right-wing paper." And, the stories are stories. I don't do that right-wing, left-wing. Okay? "The elf on the shelf is preparing your child to live in a future police state," Professor warns. And it has a picture of that goofy-looking thing. And it goes, "For some, the elf on the shelf doll with its doe-eyed gaze and cherubic face has become a whimsical holiday tradition, one that helpfully reminds children to stay out of trouble in the lead up to Christmas. For others, like, say, digital technology professor Laura Pinto, the elf on the shelf is, in her words, a capillary form of power that normalizes the voluntary surrender of privacy, teaching young people to blindly accept panoptic surveillance and deep breath, refining hegemonic power. The latter perspective is detailed in Who's the Boss, a paper published by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, in which Pinto and co-author Selena Nemorin argued that the popular seasonal doll is preparing a generation of children to uncritically accept increasingly intrusive, albeit whimsical packages, modes of surveillance. Before you burst out laughing, know that Pinto comes across as an extremely friendly and not at all paranoid on the phone. You see, they have to give a little dig there to anyone who has a kind of conspiratorial slant. So they have to say, oh, like the editor says, call this woman up, and the editor went, the journalist went, I spoke to her, and she's not like some conspiracy whack job, So that's that little kind of pun there, that anyone who questions government is automatically a nutcase. She is also completely serious. And then she says, the elf on the shelf is both a book and a doll. The former is a soft pixie scout elf that parents, you see, that pixie scout elf, you see, that's interesting too, because the scout part is interesting because that ties in with the Junior Spies in 1984. A soft pixie scout elf that parents are instructed to hide around the house. The accompanying book, written in rhyme, tells a Christmas-themed story that explains how Santa Claus kept tabs on who was naughty and who was nice. The book describes elves hiding in children's homes each day during the holidays to monitor behaviour before returning to the North Pole each night with a report for the boss. Because we live in a world grappling with corporate smartphone surveillance, behavioural management applications in the classroom, and private communications and deceptions by various governments, Pinto, a digital technology professor in the University of Ontario's Institute of Technology, sees the elf on the shelf doll as one development among many threatening our collective definition of privacy. She's right too. If she's right, she is right, in all likelihood she's fighting a losing battle. You see how the editorial swing comes in then? The Elf on the Shelf book sold over 6 million copies. It's always 6 million, you ever notice that? And joined Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, according to the Daily Mail. I don't think the elf is a conspiracy, and I realise we're talking about a toy, Pinto told the Post. It sounds humorous, but we argue if that is okay for a kid with all this bureaucratic elf spying on them in their home. It normalises the idea of surveillance in a future restriction of our privacy that might be easily accepted. Until the introduction of the elf on the shelf, Santa's mythological helpers had always been relegated to the toy workshop, Pinto said. After the story and the toy were introduced by Shanada Bell, a one-time Atlanta reading teacher, the traditional narrative changed to including the hiding, surveillance and back-and-forth travel, Pinto said. As evidenced by the millions of books and dolls sold, the Toronto Star writes, the story has become a cultural phenomenon, with parents littering their social media feeds and photos of the elf in its strange places. Facebook, in fact, is how Pinto said she originally became aware of the doll. Last December, she began to see her Facebook friends page who have kids posting the elf on the shelf photos. The more she read about the doll and the rules accompanying it, the more she began to feel like the game that resonated with the purpose of the infamous Panopsian Jeremy Benthman's 18th century design for a model prison, a central tower in a circular structure surrounded by cells that made it impossible for prisoners to know if they were being watched. That's very interesting. She writes, Elf on the Shelf presents a unique and prescriptive form of play that blurs the distinction playtime and real life. Children who participate in play with the Elf on the Shelf doll have to contend with rules at all times during the day. They may not touch the doll, and they may accept that the doll watches them at all times with the purpose of reporting to Santa Claus. This is different than the more conventional play with dolls, where children create play worlds born of imagination, moving dolls, and determining interactions with other people and other dolls. Rather, the hands-off play demanded by the elf is limited to finding but not touching the elf on the shelf every morning, and acquiescence to surveillance during waking hours under the elf's watchful eye. The elf on the shelf controls all parameters of play, who can do and touch what, and ultimately attempts to dictate the child's behaviour outside the time used for play. The whole thing with panopticonism under the Jeremy Bateman structure, Pinto said, is that you never quite knew if you were being watched and not, and that it forced you into behaving a certain way. The elf is the same way. Pinto said she's not the first person to be troubled by the elf on the shelf surveillance. She said parents routinely contact her to say they've changed the rules of the game after it made families uneasy. And many kids, she said, often intuitively feel like spying and being tattletaled is wrong. A mum emailed me and told me that the first day they read The Elf on the Shelf and put the elf out, her daughter woke up crying because she was being watched by the elf. Pinto recounted they changed the game so it wouldn't scare the child. See, we're into really dark stuff here now, folks. Emma Weaverman, a blogger with Today's Parent, told the Star that the idea of the elf watching someone all the time is creepy. You got that right. It makes the motivation to behave something that's external. She told the paper, if I'm not around or if the elf is not around, do they act crazy? Translated to academia speak, Pinto and Nemorin make a similar point in Who's the Boss. What is troubling, they write, is that the elf on the shelf presents and normalizes anecdotal evidence, reveals that children perform an identity that is not only for caretakers but for an external authority. The elf on the shelf, similar to the dynamic between citizen and authority, is the context of the surveillance state. For all you skeptics out there, take a look, and it has a picture of them dressed like a Mountie or a cow. Now, this story is very, very, very interesting. We are seeing, you see, it's the woman who invented this toy. She was not, she wasn't working for the state, or she wasn't working for the NSA or the CIA. But I always talk about the collective unconscious, and the collective unconscious always manifests itself in this kind of way. Things will come up from the collective unconscious and explode these as archetypes, usually in a material or tangible form, into our reality to tell us what's really going on. A few years ago, I did a lecture on the black-eyed children at the Middleton Arena for the ICANN conference in Manchester, and I spoke about how the black-eyed children were probably a kind of a tulpa created by the human mind to compensate for the fact that many parents were not actually good parents anymore, or having to work long hours and not be there, not necessarily their fault, and instead were taking to drugging their children with medications such as Ritalin. And the black-eyed children, because they used to appear in hotel rooms a lot of the time, knocking on hotel doors, or knocking on the doors of homes where one of the parents was never really at home, it was probably this same kind of idea. It was a manifestation of the subconscious that represents itself in art, in culture, in music, and in this case, the elf on the shelf. Now, this is not the first time this idea has been put out there. Back in the Germanic world, and this is basically what the elf on the shelf is a modern version of Krampus. Krampus is, and it's also very important that this story is actually being released at this time, because this would be the time that Krampus, the allegory of Krampus, the story, the mythology of Krampus, is put out there. Krampus is in the Germanic world, particularly in Central Europe and other places like that, the kind of the satanic Father Christmas, shall we say, the dark side of Christmas. Krampus represents the side of the Christmas season where children are being watched. Now, although Krampus has been around with us since the pre-Christian era, well, it's been said it was, but when I started looking into the history of Krampus, I couldn't really find a lot to indicate that it did exist in the pre-Christian era. It was more like it was like the shield and the gig thing here in Ireland. It was an understanding kind of that it came from pagan times. But when you really look into it, they're much more modern. Now, Krampus came to the fore and exploded as a cult phenomenon in the Germanic world. Here we go again, folks. At the same time, the Prussian education system and Emperor Wilhelm II brought in the whole idea of incredible, intense bureaucracy and monitoring of the Prussian. Now remember, Prussia was a vast empire stretching from the Baltics all the way to the North Sea and almost down into Bavaria. And the same kind of bureaucracy was put on people there. And there was two things that came up in that. You see, Christmas is spooky, folks. This is why we're going to have this. I'm going to try and keep the show on the air if I can find a producer over the Yule period, because Christmas, as we come closer to the dark side, we have Christmas, Charles Dickens, this all comes up to the fore. But anyway, the Prussians, Krampus came to the fore as the demon, the sort of satanic anti-Santa who punishes Prussian and German children, or children in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which eventually spread, for not being good and not doing what their parents or what the teachers tell them. At the same time, the Prussian education model happened, and now we have the elf on the shelf at the same time. The Common Core model is coming in. You see, Christmas is so, like, you look at songs like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, right? What does Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer tell you? That individuality is wrong, and you must be a team player, and you must, and only popularity matters. You know, everyone made fun of him because he had a shiny nose, but then one Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, you know, Rudolph, with your nose so bright, will you light my sleigh? And then all the reindeers loved him. You see, it's all about competition. It's all about conformity, and Christmas is dark. Christmas is, you know, I tend to more, shall we say, feel an empathy for the Krampus kind of elements of Christmas, or the Charles Dickens darkness of Christmas, which is where we will go. And I think I want to take a break for a song now because I'm choked. As you can, I still have this bloody cold, as you can tell. And Paula, could you please play the first song, which I believe is Melt. And welcome back to the show. I hope you hear me okay. We've been having technical difficulties again, which is very annoying, but we persevere on. Apparently, I'm told by the producers that there's a funny kind of like someone's picking up the sound. So, and welcome back to the Velocity of Now with Thomas Sheridan here on Reality Bytes, and we're having some difficulty with the technical issues tonight. Not our fault. I'm sure the gremlins are having a listen in. I've got so much to talk about tonight. I could almost do a 3-hour show, but we won't because I haven't got time. But I want to talk about a few other quick things. I was just reminded of something then about the darkness of the world and how we live in this sort of new age time. And then I was thinking about that transhumanist pop star. Human beings are so strange and so odd that nothing surprises me, and we are so obsessed with stardom. Well, when I say we, I don't mean me or you if you listen to the show, but in general, so obsessed with stardom that I was trying to find out what was famous before sports figures. Like we have today, we have sports figures, right? People in sports stars like David Beckham are really famous. And I was looking back and said, well, before the age of organised sports, which is relatively recent, like, you know, things like big rugby, cricket, soccer, American football, baseball, these leagues are not much more than a century old. Before that, there was the odd thing, like you said, rat catching was a weird sport, but who were the sports people back then were, believe it or not, hangmen. Did you know that? People who used to hang. A hangman was like a rock star back then. And it was a very interesting socio-cultural and even kind of like mystical reason for this. I was just reading the other day down out there was a guy caught over in jail in County Tyrone here in Ireland. There was loads of executions, but at one point they ran out of a hangman. So they had to contact London and get one sent over. And there was a guy called William Marwood who was brought to Omagh in 1873 to attend the hanging of a John Montgomery at the county jail. Now what happened was Montgomery was a policeman who had visited the bank manager regarding a security thing in Omagh, and when he saw the cash on the table, the copper murdered him and took the cash. And then, and I'm back there. I believe that was I'm back here, and I believe that was the Specials Ghost Town that was playing. But we're not going to be Ghost Town here tonight. I've had to change my microphone, so the sound might be a bit different. But please bear with us, because we'll get through this, no problem. And I just want to make an apology to Carrie Lee. Our website is called Recipe for Anarchy, and it's full of lots of useful stuff there. I said stuff that just make life easier, and some of the website you should check out, Recipe for Anarchy. Great videos and articles on it. Now, as I was just before the last technical breakdown or interruption or attack, I was talking about how executioners were actually the superstars of their time before sports. It's amazing as that sounds, but there was a guy called William Marwood. He was brought over to Ireland to hang a policeman who actually robbed the bank in Omagh in County Tyrone. And his arrival in Ireland was met like a rock star, or like a pop star. He was and as we negotiate the issues on tonight's show, I've been informed that I can overrun us a half an hour or whatever I want. So we'll get everything on the show tonight because there's so much I want to share with you, and it just that I've been like a little boy on Christmas morning wanting to share these stories with you. So we'll lose nothing. Those of you who are in the UK and Ireland, I know it's a late night for you, but you'll always be on the podcast, and if you don't want to stay up. And for the rest of you, hold on, because, as they say, the show will go on. Now, I was talking about that guy Marwood, the superstar executioner, the hangman. Now, this guy was an interesting character. He used to come, when he was brought to a town to hang somebody, there was a crowd would be there to cheer for him, and they even had chants. You know the way soccer players today have chants? Well, he had a chant, and it was like a chant, and it was something like, who killed Ma? It was Da. Who killed Da? It was Marwood. This kind of thing, like these kind of chants, like soccer chants for this guy. And this guy was he was based, like I said, he was the David Beckham of his day. And he used to hang people, and he was considered a genius because he developed the long drop method of hanging. And back then you could have a course you could take for hangmanship to teach you how to be a good hangman. And Marwood developed this thing that it would kill the person instantly. They would fall right down and the neck would snap. And it made him very popular with even condemned prisoners. They wanted to be hanged by Marwood because he was known as a quick killer. And as I said, he was an interesting character. He was considered a simpleton who was only good at hanging. Well, he's a lot like David Beckham is a simpleton, is only good at football. But it was the same kind of thing. And these hangmen were stars, and this continued up until the 1960s, believe it or not, this obsession with the hangman. Now, one of the reasons was that this is really creepy, but hangmen were often not paid in salary. They were paid in the rope that they hanged their famous person in. So if they hanged a famous condemned prisoner, the rope was extremely valuable because they would cut the rope into sections and sell it off so people could say, this is the rope that hanged this such and such a woman or such a man. And this is the rope that hung this person. And that's where the expression money for old rope comes from. Another aspect of this was it goes into the supernatural as well. The rope was also believed to have the energy of the person on the moment of death, only if they died quickly. And this is why Marwood's ropes were considered so valuable, because the person died instantly. And the death cult that surrounded this, there was a belief that as the person was killed instantly, the life force travelled up their spinal column and into the rope. Not an unfeasible idea when you think about it. And when you think of people are into the whole chakras idea and everything, so the life force would shoot up the rope, and the rope was believed then to have magical powers. This would be in the early days, and later on it was just a morbid curiosity to have the rope that hung someone famous in your house, or a piece of it, money for old rope. And the ones who believed in the mystical power of the rope, it became almost like a wand to them. Now, Lewis Spence, in his book on the Encyclopedia of the Cult from 1926, talks about this, and I spoke about this also in my book Walpurgis Night, Volume 1, that the Finns were considered at one time to be the kind of most mystical people in Europe. The Finnish mystics used to go around, and they used to sell rope. And the rope had knots tied in it, and this rope believed to have magical power, and that was also the rope used in hanging, or in things like that, or the rope that bound a famous king. The rope itself was supposed to have power, and this developed on to Marwood and the cult of the executioner, and that's why the pop stars, not the pop stars, but the people they had before football and sports stars were hangmen, the hangman, and it was considered, they had groupies and everything. And when they came to a town in Ireland, it would be like the arrival of a top sports star, like a David Beckham. Marwood is coming to town to hang such and such. And this is why hanging was a public spectacle too. The rope itself was considered magical. There was also a weird kind of female sacrifice element to it. It's particularly in Victorian times, the killing of women by the hangman was always portrayed as a romantic thing, as a kind of almost a beautiful form of sacrifice. I mean, it's really bizarre, but this is the kind of world we live in, and people have always been strange. There was a woman called Louise Masson. She was hanged in Newgate prison in the late 1800s for brutally killing her son Manfred. The body was found and stuck in the station laboratory. I think it was in Reading, at Reading train station. And this was also probably another one of these children that belonged to the elite and they don't want to own up. She was going to France to pretend that she was going to take the child back to see the original father. She protested her innocence right to the very end. But when she was hanged in Margate prison, there was all kinds of drawings done about her, and even like the illustration of her being hanged was a picture that people would frame and keep in their homes. Again, and they would always talk about how beautiful she was when she met the rope, how beautiful she was when she made the drop, how beautiful she was when she was hanged. So this is where the expression "money for old rope" and why the hangman was such a superstar in times past. Very, very, very creepy and very weird. And but the Victorian culture itself was very weird. You have to remember now, back to my book Walpurgis Night again, shameless plug, but people have been constantly underestimating the influence of the Prussian aristocracy in Europe. Remember, this death cult came in with Prince Albert. Prince Albert was the consort of Queen Victoria, and he himself was a Prussian noble. And this is why the Saxe-Coburgs and the Battenbergs, as they became what they were known before they became the Windsors and the Mountbattens, they brought a lot of this kind of Prussian death cult culture over with them, Prussian aristocratic death cult. Now, Prussia was a very, very different place. I've got a film coming out called From Prussia with Blood, which will talk about all this kind of thing. And showed the influence that these people have had in Europe through now I'm not talking about the Prussian people, I'm talking about the Prussian aristocracy. And Prince Albert, the consort of Queen Victoria, was the reason why a lot of these kind of Prussian aristocratic death cults made their way into England and Great Britain and these islands as well, that he was brought that over. In fact, when Prince Albert himself died, Queen Victoria created a really bizarre death cult around him. She dressed in black for the rest of her life and all these kinds of things. And it was romanticized that she was was the only man she ever loved and all this kind of thing. It was just a spooky, spooky death cult. And she built like the Albert Memorial in I think it's in Hyde Park or Regent's Park. And then she also built the Royal Albert Hall. And everything was Albert this, Albert that. And okay, maybe she did love the guy, but the death cult she built around them was very much on par with how these people are and how they brought this obsession with death, this romanticism with death, as long as it's not our death, it's their death. I mean, it was the death of others, which eventually manifested in hangmen on these islands becoming the superstars of their day. It's an interesting, funny old world we live in. I hope the signal is coming through nice and clear tonight. My train of thought has been totally, sent out of whack by these bloody gremlins or interference or whatever we're having on the line tonight. But I had two kind of main stories I want to talk to you about tonight. And the first one is about, we live in an age, particularly in these awakened times, where people talk about celebrity and how strange and dark it all is, and we have these websites that show Illuminati symbolisms around these actors and singers and songwriters, and then you have people doing good work like Freeman Fly. He's done some very good work into this kind of stuff, and it is dark and it is spooky, and it's nothing really new. If you look at Kenneth Anger's book Hollywood Babylon, back in I think it came out in 1958. It was probably one of the first books I read. It was banned in America, believe it or not, that book. It was banned in America after the New York Times basically declared war on it. And Kenneth Anger did not tell a lie in that book. None of it. It was all true, every single word of it. Right back to the very beginning of Hollywood, how dark it was. The the silent film star who was kind of like the lovable sort of like Bill Cosby of his day, ironically, Fatty Arbuckle. And it's interesting too that Bill Cosby had a cartoon character called Fat Albert. But Fatty Arbuckle murdered a woman with his penis. I know it sounds kind of funny, but it was a horrific thing. He raped her while she was passed out, and he ruptured her kidneys, I think it was, or he caused septicemia through a rupture because he was so violent with her, and that became a scandal in Hollywood at the time. But it was all played down. And Kenneth Anger, between that and other things like James Mansfield's mysterious connection with the Temple of Set and her bizarre sort of decapitation in a car, the New York Times declared war on the book. There's nothing in that book that isn't true. But at the same time, too, because of the power of Hollywood, because of the power of the Hollywood movie and the American TV movie, we forget that it went on in other countries. Like, I've taken a huge interest in the history of German entertainment leading up to the Second World War, and you had strange things there happen as well. I mean, the German film industry was the biggest in the world at that time, up until World War II, and the giant UFA studios outside Berlin were on par with Hollywood in terms of, probably even bigger in terms of production and superstars, and they had a whole culture of film stars. One of them was Renate Müller, who was she'll be covered in the second edition of the Walpurgis Night. She was Hitler's girlfriend, mistress. She basically groupied him, and she was a singer, quite a nice voice too, and she was also a very, very popular film star. She was the Doris Day of the German film star industry, but a younger version, and she was very flirtatious. And in real life, she was putting it out. She was grinning around, and she wanted to have her way with Adolf Hitler because he was the biggest man in politics. This is before he got elected. Now, before World War II, sorry, after he was elected, and she began an affair with him and mentioned about his sexual strangeness. That was the word she used. Hitler was into sex magic because, as I've been proving through my work, he was an occultist. Absolutely, 100%. And she spoke about his strange sexual practices and his behavior, his mimicking of the wolf during their sex. And she committed suicide by throwing herself out a window in Berlin. Now, whether it was suicide, but they said right before she killed herself, she went into a kind of a psychological deterioration, and she was talking about that Hitler had done something to her sexually. And she was in a hotel in Berlin. Downstairs, the Gestapo were in the building that day. She threw herself out the window, and it was a shock for the Germans because she was their number one film star, and here she was killing her. She was dead. Now, the Germans at the time did not know she was involved in a sexual relationship with Adolf Hitler. But the Gestapo, not the Gestapo, the Nazi propaganda machine under Goebbels immediately portrayed her as a drug addict, as a misfit, as a lunatic, and her funeral, which should have really been a massive funeral, was like this miniature thing, and her family were told never to talk anything about her relationship with Hitler. So it goes on everywhere. It's not just Hollywood. It's not just Hollywood Babylon. It's entertainment Babylon. And this brings us to the story I want to talk about tonight. Now, this is basically British entertainment Babylon. And again, we look at the past to know the present and to see the future. It's always been like that. Now, there was a series. Anyone who's not from this part of the world will be unaware of a series of films called the Carry-On films. The Carry-On films were comedy films, saucy kind of British romps. Some of them are actually very, very good and very funny and very well made. But they were kind of the way that the Fabians sexualized British society in the kind of saucy, crumpet way. The main female character was a woman called Barbara Windsor. Interesting name. That's not her real name. I think her real name is Collins. And she was heavily involved in the London underground gang scene. And she knew the craze, and she knew all that whole scene. She was involved with them. She also, and the artist Francis Bacon was heavily involved in that scene as well. A lot of people don't know that. But it was kind of like a dark queer. Now, when I say queer, I don't mean a derogatory term. I actually prefer the term queer for for homosexuality than gay, because it has more of an edge to it. It's more like punk rock or something. And a lot of my gay friends call themselves queers because they don't want to be seen as namby-pamby gays with Christmas sweaters and teddy bears. They like the actual fact that they're a bit different, and I think that's a good thing. So what they called queer back then was it was almost like an edge to it, and like any other scene, it had its dark side and it had its good side, and you see that like in the books like the Naked Civil Servant by Quentin Crisp, and the phenomenal TV version of that movie by John Hurt, who always seems to be in this interesting stuff. But up until the legalization of homosexuality in England, it was almost like the gay scene in England became very intense. This is like always how it seems to happen. Things become the subconscious and the psyche below gets very, very intense and very, very dark and very, very visceral right before it's legalized. And you'll see that with everything from like abortion, like Roe versus Wade in America, to things like the legalization of homosexuality in Britain. Now, I want to talk about a particular character here. It's an amazing story, but there was a guy called, a playwright called John Orton, okay? And he was an amazing character. And I'm going to read you this article that was written by a guy called John Sanders, and I'll give you segments from it and fill you in on it. But it tells you a lot about the sort of shall we say the West End Babylon kind of thing that was going on. Now, Orton was feted as perhaps, or fated to, and through his interest in debt. In his plays, he mocked the grim weeper wittingly, controversially and successfully. His scandalous black comedy shocked, outraged and amused theatre audiences to the point where Orton-esque became a recognised term for the more outrageously macabre. But he could never have imagined that his own premature death would be horrifically unfunny and would send a chilling wave of horror through London's emerging gay community. John Orton called himself Joe, so he's not mistaken for the angry young playwright John Osborne. John Osborne wrote Look Back in Anger, which is actually a pretty amazing play. Orton was born in Leicester in New Year's Day, 1933. Again, 1933, like 1919, like 1947, like 1966, are these years when stuff seems to happen. They're almost like benchmark years in high strangeness. But he was born in New Year's Day, 1933. 1933 was also the year that National Socialists came to power in Britain. 1933 was also the year that the Mount Rushmore was vandalised with the faces of the presidents in order to put a knife to the heart of the Native Americans. And 1933 was a very, very interesting year for weird stuff. But anyway, he was born on the first day of 1933, and he was the oldest of 5 children in a working-class family. His father worked as a gardener in the city council. After he failed his exams, he went on to demonstrate no academic ability whatsoever, and his mother determined that he make something of himself and sent him to a business college. That didn't work out either. Orton wanted so much to be an actor. He joined several local theatrical companies, and after playing a number of minor roles, took elocution lessons to get rid of his slight lisp and a pronounced Leicestershire accent. In 1951, he auditioned for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, and was accepted. And he went down to London at the age of 18, but it was a defining moment in his life. It was there that he met Kenneth Halliwell. Kenneth Halliwell was the man who was to become his lover, mentor, friend, and, well, I'll wait to see how this story ends up. Now, Halliwell had also been accepted into RADA, and like Orton, he was gay too. But unlike Orton, he came from a wealthy background. But this is interesting. Halliwell came from a wealthy background. And listen to this one. Orton was the working class one. He came from and had an income and an inheritance and was well educated. So the fresh lad from the country, funded by his grant from Leicester's education committee, Halliwell was an inspiring teacher. He encouraged Orton to read and study literature. He had a great impact on the development of the pupil's creative ability. A month after his arrival in London, Orton was invited to share Halliwell's flat in West Hampstead. On the day he moved in, he wrote, "Well," in his diary. On the next day, he wrote, "Well," with 2 exclamation marks. And on the third day, he wrote, "Well," with 3 exclamation marks. Almost certainly, this entries, with the exclamation marks increasing, recorded his initiation into homosexuality. Halliwell basically, broke him into that world. Although they were not linked professionally, Orton and Halliwell were a husband and wife in their private lives. And no examination of Orton's career can be complete without considering the part played by his partner. Kenneth Halliwell was 7 years older than Orton and was raised in a domestically divided home. His doting and much adored mother died in front of him from a wasp sting. Just think of that. When he was 11, planting the seed of a lifelong habit of self-pity associated with his low self-esteem. His relationship with his father, who was a chief cashier at a shipyard in Liverpool, was always poor. At the age of 23, he discovered the body of his father, who had committed suicide by gassing himself. After stepping over the body to switch off the oven, Halliwell then had his morning tea and shaved before eventually raising the alarm. Now this sets off other kinds of alarms. This is as the story develops, you will actually become suspicious that maybe Halliwell played a part in his father's demise. After graduating from RADA, the two men went on to separate ways for a while. Halliwell to a repertory theatre in Wales and Orton to an assistant stage manager's job in Ipswich. Both decided the stage wasn't for them, and they returned to London, where they lived in Halliwell's and social security. They did no work, seemingly believing that they were above it, except for writing novels that were all rejected. It was at this time that they were involved in an incident that was to end in prison sentences for both of them. At a loss for something to do, and as a result of wanting to protest against a society they increasingly disliked, they stole books from the local library and edited the covers of the dust jackets. Some of the pictures they altered were converted into gay incidents. Another, a book by Dame Sybil Thorndike, and the actress already had a picture of her looking thoughtfully towards heaven. Orton pasted part of a Greek statue onto the picture, so the actress seemed to be staring directly at the genitals, and typed a cautious caption, "I was working from dawn to dusk to serve thousands of soldiers, sailors and airmen." When maiden ladies picked up the books, as they were intended to do, were suitably shocked and complained. The librarian endured their protest for 4 years before he narrowed his suspicions down to Orton and Halliwell. In order to get proof in the form of a letter written on their own typewriter, he wrote them a spurious official letter complaining about a van parked outside their flat. When he received the typed reply, he had the evidence he wanted and passed it on to the police. The two men were arrested, hauled off before the magistrate, and jailed for 6 months and fined £260 each. Just think about that. For just, defacing library books, they got 6 months in prison. Halliwell was stunned by the sentence. It increased his self-pity and made him even more internalised. Shortly after his release, he tried to commit suicide. Orton was more sanguine. "I knew we got the prison sentence just because we were queers," he said, which is probably the truth. "Being in the nick brought some detachment to my writing, but before prison I had been vaguely conscious of something rotten somewhere. Prison crystallized this, and the old horse society really lifted up the skirts, and stench was pretty foul." You see, Orton was waking up. From then on, he began to use his experience to hoard his gift for satire and the expense of the old horse society. But in the meantime, Halliwell's legacy was drying up, and the court fine had cleared out his bank account. They wanted to move so they could work for 6 months in the Cadbury's chocolate factory. I mean, this is even bizarre by itself. Saving their earnings to buy a flat at 25 Knoll Road, Islington. Today the house bears the celebrity Joe Orton lived here plaque. Orton had no particular wish to write, but deciding that he had no future in the theatre, he sat down and wrote a black comedy called The Boy Hairdresser. It concerns a man whose brother has been killed in a road accident by a careless driver. The man provokes the driver to kill him, so he will go to prison. The BBC decided to buy it, and it was broadcast in August 1964, entitled The Ruffian on the Stairs. The play gave Orton a foot in the literary world. In the next one, The Brilliant Loot, and this is a fantastic film and book and play if you ever get a chance to see it. Loot, L-O-O-T, made him the darling of the literati. Halliwell and Dennis, teenage gays, tied up the corpse of Hal's mother, bandaged it like a mummy and put it in the wardrobe. They then used her coffin to hide the proceeds of the bank robbery. Enter Police Inspector Truscott, absurd and pompous, who believes that he's better than Sherlock Holmes and draws the lion's share of the laughs as Orton uses him to belittle authority. Brilliant. Orton has written the role especially for his friend Kenneth Williams. Now, Kenneth Williams brings us to the carry-on things. Kenneth Williams was this camp actor who was the epitome of the kind of campy character in the in these carry-on British comedies. Now, Kenneth Williams had an interesting history as well. Like Halliwell, he was a suspect in murdering his father as well. And this is one of the reasons Kenneth Williams never went to America or never toured outside the UK, because he was well known in Interpol that he was a suspect in a murder, his father's murder. And just like Halliwell's murder, Kenneth Williams' murder of his father, this is it's almost like a Greek Shakespearean kind of idea. The fathers are being murdered by the kind of emerging homosexual class in order to legitimize themselves. Despite his closeness to his partner, Halliwell was dismayed by Orton's success. He was consumed with jealousy. You see, Halliwell was, because he was an aristocrat or an upper class, the upper class cannot stomach the idea of working class doing well for themselves. This is it's a psychic disease they all have. And it doesn't matter if it was his lover, his hatred and jealousy just went to his head. How dare this common gutter snipe achieve success that I deserve? He was consumed by jealousy, referring to Orton's plays as our plays, being reduced, as he saw it, to a mere appendage by Orton's star-studded success made him increasingly depressed. Friends were convinced he was on the edge of a breakdown. Halliwell's ill humour was also made worse by Orton's promiscuity. While Halliwell was happy to sleep with only a few other men, Orton cast his net wide, spending his spare time cottaging, that's gay slang for picking up men in public lavatories, toilets, and at public conveniences in Islington Green, and then writing about his pickups in his diary, left around ostensibly for Halliwell to read. Orton's next play, Enchanting Mr. Sloane, was presented in an experimental theatre in London in May 1964. It was critically acclaimed again, but lost lots of money. One pundit who liked it was the playwright Terence Rattigan, whose own work was beginning to go out of fashion. He arranged for it to be transferred to the West End, where it became a hit and ran for months. Entertaining Mr. Sloane is about a young man who takes a room in the home of a middle-aged brother and sister who quickly set about seducing him. He loses his temper and kills the older grandfather, whereupon the brother and the sister tell him they won't call the police if he agrees to become their sex slave. Friends who expressed concern for Halliwell's health also became convinced that Orton was tiring of his partner and that he would have been happy for him to let him go. Even so, the pair went on holiday together with Tangiers in May 1967, and they both slept with Arab boys, as did Kenneth Williams. It was they used to go to Morocco and North Africa to have sex with young boys, and this was just what they did. There's actually a photograph of both Orton and Halliwell with Kenneth Williams in Africa. That's a picture you'll see for the video of this, for the YouTube version of this video. Their holidays were punctuated by bitter quarrels, one of which concluded by Halliwell's declaration, "When I get back to England, we're through." Orton shrugged. He didn't mind, because by now his success had led him to fall completely in love with himself. You see, it's just like almost like a Greek tragedy, isn't it? The year 1967 was a coming out year for Britain's gay community. The new Sexual Offences Act substantially decriminalised homosexual acts and allowed gay men some freedom to live their lives openly without fear. The act was born out of the Wolfenden Report, which recommended a change in the law for both humanitarian and practical reasons, while observing that the authorities should not concern themselves with private acts. The passing of the act came down a decade of manic clampdown generally throughout the 1950s on homosexuality in Britain. This is what I was saying, when as it changes, as things change, and like say new liberalism comes in, there's a ferocious sort of like pre-backlash. Before it, it's almost like an overture of backlash before, and darkness and intensity before the kind of main performance of legalization. There was a groundswell of establishment feelings after the social healing of the Second World War that they should be returned to traditional morality, when the police were on the forefront of ensuring this happened. Homosexuality became the number one enemy within. You just read The Naked Civil Servant by Quentin Crisp to see what that's all about. It was associated not only with perversion, but thanks to the defection of diplomatic spies, yet it played a huge part with communism and spying and so on. As a result, gay men were given draconian prison sentences, subject to extreme prejudice, blackmail and witch hunting. The headline-hitting case of the joint trial of Lord Montagu, Banaloo and Michael
Pitt Rivers and Peter Woldenblood in early 1954, convicted of sexual offences with two young airmen. Montague was jailed for a year and the other for 18 months. After his release from Wildwood, the journalist campaigned bigotry against the harsh application of sexual offences laws. So again, before it was legalised, liberalised, it became incredibly dark. So remember that there's always a darkness before the dawn in everything. Oh, anyway, so the gifted novelist Robert Cook was jailed for 9 months and took his place in the privacy of his own home. Brian Epstein, who discovered the Beatles, died after an accidental overdose of prescribed sleeping pills following his arrest for persistent impromptuing by a police provocateur, John Meek. There's a big rumour going around that the English talentless singer Cilla Black was the one who grassed out Brian Epstein. We'll never know the truth, but the Beatle connection and all this is very interesting. And so on, it went on. And so on Saturday, the 5th of November 1967, Orton went on his own to a Chelsea Potter pub in the King's Road. He met a friend, Peter Noam, to whom he had confided that he had another boyfriend and he wanted to get rid of Halliwell, but didn't know how to go about it. How much Halliwell precisely knew about this can only be conjectured. He had written books that had been rejected, and he was losing his hair and he was older, heavier and less attractive than his buoyant partner. He had been in touch with the Samaritans who take calls for potential suicides. Feeling increasingly isolated and threatened by Orton's theatrical successes, he was numbing himself with increasing quantities of antidepressants and barbiturates. The last person that spoke to him was his doctor, who had arranged for him to see a psychiatrist. The doctor spoke to Halliwell 3 times on the phone. The last call was at 11 o'clock on the August 9th, and Halliwell took the psychiatrist and suggested, "Don't worry, I'm feeling better now and I'll go and see you tomorrow morning." Halliwell would certainly have been aware that Orton had another big success looming, as he'd been commissioned to write the script and star in the Beatles' next movie, After Help, which is entitled Up Against It. But the Beatles didn't do this film because it was considered too gay, or too queer, as they said back then. And the Beatles had no interest in it, and Paul McCartney later on said it was just basically a gay comedy that really didn't suit the Beatles. But the decision had been taken on the night of August 9th when Orton had got to bed and went to sleep. He had every reason to feel satisfied with himself. Loot, his first play, had been named the Evening Star's best play of 1966, 33 years after 1933, and he was in the final stages of revising What the Butler Saw, often regarded as his best play, featuring cross-dressing, outrageous sexual innuendo. That's what I'm talking about, the carry-on kind of thing. And debunking of cherished national myths. All wonderful stuff, by the way. This is a big part of my work over the years, is to use this kind of stuff to smash oppression. The Joker is always the one who's the last card put in the deck. And this is probably what happened to... This is when the Orton Halliwell story, for me, takes on a conspiratorial aspect. His rise as a highly successful dramatist had been meteoric, and he had been used as an entirely new brand of humour to guide audiences around previously unapproachable territory. In the last 3 years, he had written 5 plays and 3 TV screenplays and transformed British theatre into a new farcical language, Ortonesque, and he was still only 34. Sometime that night, this all came to a horrible end. When Orton slept, Halliwell picked up a hammer and crashed it down on the right side of his head 9 times, bludgeoning him to a slow death. Then he sat down and wrote a suicide note addressed to the police and informed them that all would be explained if they read Orton's diaries, especially the latter part. The diaries had since been published, and the latter part doesn't seem to explain anything very much that isn't already known, possibly because the last 8 pages taken by the police are missing. Finally, Halliwell took an overdose of sleeping tablets and then lay down on the floor to die. The bodies were found next morning when a chauffeur sent by the Beatles management for Orton's meeting with them walked up the 3 flights of stairs and knocked on the door of the flat. There was no reply. He went off to make a phone call and was told to try again. When there was no answer, he looked through the letterbox and saw the bald head of Kenneth Halliwell lying naked on the floor next to Orton's writing desk. There were bloodstains and splashes on his head, chest and hands. The bloodstained hammer was lying on Orton's chest, and the brain matter was splattered all over the walls and ceilings. The medical verdict was that Halliwell must have died first. So how did he murder Orton if he died first? The 27 Nubutal sleeping pills he took were more likely to have killed him within 30 seconds. Orton's sheets were still warm when the police arrived. And there was a film made of that called Prick Up Your Ears if you haven't seen it. But this all speaks of sacrifice to me. It's almost like if you want anything in society, there has to there has to be a horror connected to it. Okay, so you have this sort of the emergence of gay people in Britain, and it was almost like Orton was the working class queer who was allowed to have some success after all these years of oppression. Halliwell, the upper class gay guy, murders his boyfriend out of jealousy. But what is most amazing is what happens, then the connection to the Beatles, 1966, Sgt. Pepper's, it all goes on and on. This is the rise of the processed church in England, these are pivotal times. The rise of Jimmy Savile. This is a subject and a period and a time, swinging London, swinging 60s, that has not been properly addressed. We have not had Babylon Carnaby Street yet. But the cremation was even strange. Joe Orton was cremated at Golders Green 9 days later. 24 people attended and heard the Beatles song A Day in the Life. On the previous day, Kenneth Halliwell had been cremated at Enfield, Middlesex. 2 people attended. The former lovers' ashes were combined and then scattered in the Garden of Remembrance at Golders Green. So even the way their ashes were combined at the end and scattered speaks of ritual, speaks of the darkness, speaks of someone else. But those 8 missing pages that the police tore out of the diary, Orton most likely had come into contact with someone in the British establishment. And Orton, who was definitely awake from day one, and at least in the time he came out of prison, knew how filthy and dirty these people are. Did he get an insight into the Profumo scandal? We'll never know. But those missing 8 pages, if they were ever found, would probably be a bombshell. It involved the royals. Who did it involve? But the police were scared enough of it to take the 8 pages out. Now, I'd like to take a quick break here before I go to the next bit. If there was a song available, Paula, you could play it. I don't know if there's any songs left. Do you have anything queued up? But Joe Orton, an amazing story and an amazing insight into the darkness out there. And welcome back to the Velocity of Now. Me, Thomas Sheridan, and we're getting over the gremlins and the attacks and the noise, and we're having a great show, and it's panning out just as I wanted. And don't worry, it'll be running over a bit extra, so we'll still get at least 2 full hours in. This is again the Velocity of Now. My name is Thomas Sheridan. My website is www.thomassheridanarts.com. I don't take donations, but I do have books to sell, and I have a calendar for 2015 if you'd like to get that. You'd probably still get it in time, or you'd probably just get it within the first week in January of my artwork. And I have a couple of books there. You could also get my books, Puzzling People Who Defeated Demons, and any help you can give me in that regard, I'd appreciate it. And I hope you're enjoying the show tonight. I also have the rebroadcast on newsymbolsmedia.tv, so you can listen there. So thanks for airplane. A lot of you have listened into the show tonight, and thank you very much for standing by and listening along and enjoying tonight's show. Now, that story about Joe Orton and Halliwell was a very interesting one. It's always good to look at the past to see where we're going. Kenneth Williams, as I said, who was intrinsically connected to both of them, seemed to move in big circles as well. And you have to look in the context at the time. That you see, people have to understand that gangsters and the mafia and all this stuff is indistinguishable from Hollywood and media and pop music. It's all the same thing. They all work together. Even at the lowest levels, the organised crime is involved in it. But organised crime is almost like the cement that bonds the establishment to the people. And if things go wrong, they call on the organised crime to sort it out. And that's who's killed Marilyn Monroe and the Joe Orton and even Jimi Hendrix, but also the cults as well. The cults that are involved in all these, the suspected cults that are in around all these scenes as well, that seem to have no problem getting money because they're funded by the intelligence services in every case, and their purpose is to destroy anyone. Like there's cults in the alternative media here, and their purpose is they're paid to destroy anyone in the alternative who's can reach a big audience, who comes across as normal and doesn't think the world is run by lizards and stuff like that. And that those kinds of people have to be taken down, of which I'm one. And so it's always going to be like that. And that's the game that I knew I was entering into when I got into this. And that's just how it is. Well, nothing you can do about it. Now, another interesting story that came up today that someone pointed out to me, and it's to do with business again, but it's also to do with that bizarre business relationship that politicians have with big business and catastrophe. That big business and, shall we say, social economic problems, and politicians greasing the wheels in order to facilitate new businesses, and then the politicians getting a piece of the action. Now, this came from the Taboo blog. Very, very good. One of the better conspiracy blogs out there. And it talks about, I actually saw this story today on Reuters, and it was about Cerebus Capital Management. And they were buying up Dublin. They were buying up vast amounts of properties that had crashed when the boom ended here suddenly. And there was a glut of office blocks, apartment buildings and so on in prime rental areas in Dublin city centre and a few other places around the country. And this place called Cerebus is buying them all up. They're also raiding property development failures in the UK as well, particularly ones that were on the portfolio of the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now, the name was interesting enough for me as loan, and that's why I searched in. The Cerebus, is the demonic three-headed wolf that guards the gates of hell. And it was Dante and Virgil encountered Cerebus at the gates of hell in Dante's Inferno. Now, looking at this company, its capital management seems to have a very interesting relationship between government, property speculation, and catastrophe. They seem to know when catastrophes are coming, and they seem to like to buy things up. Now, Cerebus, I don't know how you pronounce it, whatever, the Cerebus Capital Management announced that it was buying Safeway supermarkets for $9 billion just as California is going into a never-before-experienced historical water and food crisis. Interesting, eh? And they've also bought for $3.3 billion in cash 887 stores of SuperValu in Ireland, the chains here, and they're buying up supermarkets all over the place for large amounts of money, buildings, property developments, and anywhere they can actually raid the property market for cheap. Now, there's always been these kinds of parasites everywhere. They've always existed. What's interesting is the people who are involved in this group. There's a guy called Stephen Feinberg. Now, Feinberg is the co-founder and the CEO, and he maintains a very low profile, but there's all sorts of other people involved in here, such as Dan Quayle, the former Vice President of the United States. There's a former U.S. Treasury Secretary John Snow is also on their payroll, as is Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Hedge fund legend Michael Steinhardt is a shareholder director in their lending arm. Michael Dell's private investment firm has joined in with them to home builder Lennercomp to develop upscale residential communities. They always seem to happen. This company and these people always seem to be on the spot when disaster strikes. It's almost like they exist to raid cheap property. But are they proactively wrecking economies too? Was Ireland's economic crash planned by these people in order to raid the place and buy up all these top properties for free? Now, these people are very, very dark, and you're talking about the likes of Dick Cheney's old company, Halliburton, being involved in it. But they're also involved in Dynacorp, which owns the former, which used to be called Blackwater. We all know they're a mercenary organisation. But Dynacorp is also involved with Lockheed Martin in spying and surveillance. And these people are as dark as it gets, because if you look back to 1989, there was that the Washington Times blew open, and this story was completely and utterly snuffed off the pages right there and then, that there was a homosexual prostitution inquiry which ensnared many VIPs with Reagan and Bush. Call boys took midnight tours of the White House. Now, this is not surprising to those of us who are aware of what the elites are like, but for this to get on the cover of the Washington Times back in 1989, June 29, this was mind-blowing, and they produced receipts of rent boys and call boys and a prostitution ring which was at the time under investigation by the federal district authorities in Washington, D.C., which included key officials, including in the Bush and the Reagan administration, military officers, congressional aides, U.S. foreign businessmen with close social ties to Washington political elite. Reporters for the newspapers examined hundreds of credit card vouchers drawn on both corporate and personal cards and made payable to escort services operated by the homosexual ring. Interesting. Now, this brings us up to today and the disclosures regarding the CIA torture. And people discovering that what the CIA really are, what people like me have been saying for years, what the torture is, it's S&M. That's what the Bush administration, Bush 2, Bush the idiot grandson, his administration of those 8 years was very much an S&M administration. They were obsessed with S&M. Gore Vidal spoke about this in his books, that they were obsessed with beatings, and Rumsfeld and all his bunch were obsessed with torture and S&M. And Abu Ghraib was just the movie Deliverance brought to the Middle East, and these people are getting turned on by it. All you have to look at is Cheney's grimace, that sort of like that snarl he has, that you can see how rotten it is under there, how rancid below the surface this creature is. And this S&M culture doesn't only extend to their sexual lives, but it extends to how they do business. It extends to how they declare war. This is what shock and awe is. Shock and awe is Rumsfeld's S&M term. This is probably what he likes in the hotel rooms. He likes a bit of shock and awe. And so we can always tell what these people are like when the language they use. And it came out today and it's very depressing to read that the majority of Americans are actually still in favor of torture, even after the revelations that came out about what happened with the CIA. Now, I think it was, waterboarding is, it's unbelievably horrific. You wouldn't last 3 minutes to put on the needle. But what's also interesting about this and the S&M aspect of it is that the evidence procured by waterboarding, by this torture, it was useless. You pour water on somebody's face for 20 seconds and they'll admit to anything. They'll tell you anything. And the people who are doing this, these sort of like these creatures who are pouring this water on these men's faces and then sending it back to Washington for these politicians to have a jolly good time looking at the photographs. I mean, those photographs they send of Abu Ghraib, they're not. They're the soft-core versions. The hardcore versions are probably in Cheney's, desk drawer where he takes out now and again when he wants to get himself a bit excited. And this is what you're dealing with. This is how sick these people are. So Christopher Hitchens, I think it was, who had it tested on him, and he didn't last 3 seconds being waterboarded. So again, it's useless. This torture is useless except for one thing. It's useful for these monsters in terms of satisfying their personalities. As I said this week, if you wanted to understand what the mind of these people, these psychopaths in charge are like, look at a Geiger painting. Look at a Geiger painting. Just look at them. And that's what their internal personality structure is like. That's what they're like. And it comes to the surface when they get into power. So they torture and they exploit and they harvest. Not only in their sex lives, which are all about as bizarre as they can get, but also in how they approach business. They cause businesses that are torn asunder, that they cause all disasters, but it never affects them. It never ever affects them because these psychopaths in charge are beyond the law. The law does not arrest the Donald Rumsfelds. It does not arrest the Bushes. Anyone who thinks these people will ever be taken to court are living in fruitcake land. It'll never happen. There's two different worlds, the one that they own and the one that we're slaves in, and never the twain shall meet. And they will do anything and say anything because they control all the media and they control all the papers. You have someone like Rumsfeld, who is basically a demon. And I don't mean that necessarily in the allegorical sense. I could mean that literally. A demon who rampages through the world, through our culture, through our society. And he's always been there, from selling the weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein, to kill the Kurds, to today. He's still there, and all along the way they're having a laugh at us. That's why he's always got this smirk on his face. And when he says things like there are known unknowns, unknown knowns, and known whatever, this word salad he comes out with, he's not lying to us. He's telling us what he really is. They don't lie to us. They tell us what they are. We have the 2016 election coming up in America where we have a Clinton monster and a Bush monster probably running again. We know what these people are. The devil always makes himself aware of what they are. When we saw Hillary Clinton practically squirting when she was told of the death by Diane Sawyer live on TV of Gaddafi, I think it was. No, it was Gaddafi, it was Gaddafi. If any normal person was to do that on the street, to react that way regarding the death of a human being, nobody would talk to them. No one would want anything to do with them. They'd be sectioned probably and put in a psychiatric hospital. They would be considered something seriously wrong with them. But Hillary Clinton behaves like that. He saw, he died, and she gets to be made president of the United States potentially. This is how sick it is. This is how we cannot be depending on the political system. Don't give me this idea. Of course they're going to invent another kind of Ron Paul leading up to this election. The third, but he or she won't get elected. You know that, I know that. That's just there to placate you, just like, Ron Paul was. It's to shut you up. It's all part of the game, and they don't care. It's just business, and they'll kill you for nothing. And that's just how it always will be. And so I was looking around, when you look at when you talk about things like, I just have the Orton thing, you see that they play games. They play weird games, and they said to gay people in Britain, yeah, you want to be gay, you're going to have to pay some kind of sacrifice. It happens with everything. It's like that song by Neil Young, Hey, Hey, My. That's a real whistleblowing song lyrically. And he goes, there's more to the picture than meets the eye. He was in there with Laurel Canyon and all that stuff. He knows how dark it is behind the scene. And as best as he can, he was telling us through his lyrics. It's amazing that he's lasted this long. But we live in a world where the psychopaths in charge are hunting and preying, and they're torturing us, and they do it not only through wars and not only through their behavior in politics, but also their business aspects to it as well. It's just how it is. Now, vaccines is an interesting subject. I never really talk much about vaccines, and I don't know how I feel about them. Some seem to work, but there's an obsession with getting as many vaccines into us as possible. The big pharmaceuticals just want, if they could get 1 million vaccines into a child, they would do it. It's like a weird obsession. It's a weird obsession on two levels. Obviously, from that level, you can see that this is about making as much money for the pharmaceutical industry as possible. On another level, you have these weird kind of like skeptics, or whatever these people are, these real kind of people who wheel themselves out as scientists, who see vaccines as infallible. All of them, all vaccines are infallible. There's never, God is not as infallible as vaccines, and these people will defend vaccines to the hilt. And that's always what has made me kind of suspicious about the vaccine thing. The fact that they have these kind of stormtroopers who are basically wheeled out on the internet to attack and scream at anyone who says, who doubts any kind of, even the most logical or sensible questioning of a vaccine. And again, you think this is a brand new thing, right? You think this is a brand new thing. And you look back through the archives like I always do, and you find out that vaccines played a pivotal part in a murder trial in England back in 1943. There was an individual called Koopman, Charles William Koopman, and he was charged with murdering, which he did do this. He was charged with murdering a mother and a baby, and but he said that he didn't have any memory of it. And the story at the time was that the vaccination he'd been given for smallpox had caused him to have a form of encephalitis, which caused a mind blackout, maybe from the mercury, whatever used in it. Well, what was happening, interesting, was the case, and I'll read you about what happened in the case, and it speaks of the authorities or the pharma company getting involved in the verdict. And during the case for his defence in the murder of this woman and this child, the defence counsel, Mr. Thorpe, told the jury, "I'm asking you to say that this man is guilty of the acts complained of, but he was insane when he did them." The first defence witness, Dr. Isaac Frost, a consultant psychiatrist, said that after examining Koopman, he concluded that on the night of the murders he did not know what he was doing, or that it was wrong. This was due to a combination of alcohol, an epileptic temperament, and the effects of a vaccine for smallpox 8 days before the crime. During one day, August 31st, Koopman was inoculated against typhoid and cholera, injected against tinnitus, and vaccinated against smallpox. He is still suffering from post-vaccinal encephalitis. So even in the court case, this guy was suffering from the after effects of the vaccine, said Dr. Frost. Then it added that he thought it was especially significant that just before the attacks on Mrs. Brewer and her daughter, Koopman had turned the gas up and down. And this is the gas lighting in the house. This mirrored the behaviour of a patient at Conley Hatch Mental Hospital in northwest London. She would turn the gas up and down shortly before having an epileptic fit, Dr. Frost told the court. But the prosecution, however, Dr. Hugh Garrison, the medical officer at Brixton Prison, said that he thought that Koopman knew what he was doing on the night of September 8, 1943, and that he was not insane. A second Crown medical witness, Dr. Dave Dehill, a psychiatrist, said that he could find no evidence that Koopman did not know what he was doing. An electroencephalograph examination which recorded the activity of his brain showed that he was predisposed to being abnormal. Now, this is probably an early version of a CAT scan or an fMRI scan. That might indicate a predisposition to epilepsy, but it might also show a predisposition to violent temper. Summing up, Mr. Justice Asquith said the jury might wonder how, if Koopman did not know what he had done, had he been able to give a graphic and detailed account in his statement to the police. Clearly the jury was confused by so many possibilities, and after retiring for 90 minutes they returned to ask the jury for further guidance. On the law definition of insanity, Mr. Justice Asquith said the verdict of guilty but insane could be returned only if the jury were satisfied that the prisoner suffered from a defective reason due to disease of the mind, whereby he knew what he was doing but did not know he was doing anything wrong. 10 minutes later, the jury found Charles Chapman guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to death. His appeal was dismissed by a panel of doctors appointed to examine him, found no sign of insanity. On December 15th, 1943, he was hanged at Pentonville Prison. Now, what happened there, if you read that full story, that the guy you had doctors saying that his encephalitis and his had been caused by the vaccine. While he was sitting in the trial, in the stand, the doctor was saying that he was still suffering from post-vaccine neurological damage. The jury obviously sided with him that he wasn't responsible for this. They took a break, went back, came out, given a little lecture, and then found him guilty. They probably found him guilty under the assumption that they would wash their hands of it, and the medical committee would then later on, during the appeal before his execution, examine him and find that he had been vaccine damaged. The fact was that he was up against a series of doctors who were probably on the payroll, getting kickbacks, part of this vaccines are infallible mindset, and the vaccine industry was too big and too powerful, particularly in the war when they were giving everyone vaccines, to risk this business. And so he was found guilty and hanged. And this is probably the oldest case I can find in terms of the courts of vaccination damage. So there's nothing, you have people today who come and say, my child's handicap or disability was caused by vaccine, that they were a perfectly normal baby going, mommy, daddy, just like a normal child. And then the next thing, they had a vaccine and they were autistic. And then when the parents tried to bring it up, they're called mad. And you have these cold-blooded monsters, I might add, on the internet declaring themselves to be experts in this, that, and the other because they probably read a couple of Richard Dawkins books, slagging these parents off. And yet we have a case going back as far as 1943 of an absolute proof in men. If you read this case and the files of this case, Koopman was innocent. His epilepsy was brought about and his encephalitis was brought about by his vaccination. He was also in the RAF, so he would have been undergoing mind control during basic training as well. Chemicals. The war of the psychopaths upon us is also very much related to chemicals. They love injecting us. They love putting chemicals inside us. They see we're lab rats to them. We're lab rats, and there's no difference between a human to a psychopath CEO of a corporation. There's no difference between to them seeing us as lab rats than a human being. We're no different. We're just no different. And this is why they have all these public health policies that always involve getting as much chemicals and doing as many tests as possible. And damn the consequences. Their research and development will be intergenerational. And that brings me to the final story. And I think this final story tonight is a tour de force of how the psychopaths in charge play with our minds. A few years ago, I saw a video by Freeman Fly that he filmed, I think it was down in Mexico or somewhere in Central America, of the Mayans having a ritual involving the soft drink Pepsi. And I was laughing at it. But they seemed to be very specific about having and using Pepsi. Now, Pepsi, the soft drink, well, what's the big deal with this? If I was going to drink a cola, I would drink Coke, because I always found Pepsi to have a very strange sweet flavor. And I always found it interesting that when I lived in the United States, that Pepsi and Coke fell along ethnic lines. It was the strangest thing. Like, you could not go into an Italian pizzeria and get Coca-Cola. It was always Pepsi. Now, whether that was some kind of, like, mafia thing, I don't know. I'm not going to stereotype people. But it's just the funniest thing. And I've never liked Pepsi. I've always preferred Coke when I did drink soda. Now, so someone had mentioned to me, a friend had mentioned to me last week about Pepsi, and he says, Pepsi has human aborted fetus embryos used to create a flavor enhancer. And I said, come on. And he goes, yep, let's look it up. And so I began to explore this story open-mindedly. Now, one of the things about Pepsi is they always talk about Pepsi is the drink of the new generation, or Generation Pepsi. And someone pointed out that if you turn the new Pepsi can upside down, it says, is dead. ISDED, dead as in like text language, is dead. And the fellow who founded Pepsi never gave a real reason for why he used the term Pepsi. Why that term, the term Pepsi is a term that means nothing. It's funny that, look, someone actually said that Pepsi Cola is actually an anagram of Episcopal. It's an interesting one as well. But I wanted to find out if, you know, to debunk this thing, but it was true, I was going to put it out in the air, if aborted fetus cells were used to create a flavor enhancer in Pepsi drink, as disgusting as that is. Now, what this became for me was, when I started to look at this, was a journey into how we are gaslighted. The conjecture was, on the conspiratorial side, that Pepsi uses aborted fetuses in its product. That's just to strip it down to its basic. And the answer to this really is that, yes, there's an element of truth to this, but not as literal as that. And the reason why is that it tells us so much about the world we live in today and how we're played with. Basically, the bottom line is that Pepsi uses a flavor enhancer called HEK 293, which they won't admit, made by a biotech company called Semonex, which was started back in 1973. And it's made from human embryonic kidney cells, 293 cells. So we can confirm that a company called Semomix, a biotech firm, created a flavoring agent from human kidney cells, and they're in Pepsi. But neither Pepsi or Semonex will say it's not true, which means it is true. Okay, it is true. Okay? Because if it wasn't true, they'd come out and say it. But they don't. They don't answer any investigative journalist saying, can you give us the yes or no? Do you use humans' kidney cells, cultures, in flavoring Pepsi? And you don't get an answer, which means it's true, okay? Now, Pepsi are very big into marketing. They're very big into using soccer players, especially nowadays. You see David Beckham, he's showing up all over tonight, sucking down the kidney cells and the aborted fetuses. You see, like, all the other players like Ronaldo and the rest of them. And maybe that's why your man Suarez is a cannibal. The guy who played for Liverpool and Uruguay. He likes biting people. Maybe he's all the Pepsi he's had to drink. He's got a taste for human flesh. But there's a conspiracy for you. And in India, the biggest film star in the world, believe it or not, a guy called Shah Rukh Khan, has been pushing Pepsi. He's their Pepsi man in India for years now. And it's the same thing. It's always a taste of the generation. And their ads going right back to the 70s. Actually, they started using the human kidney cells back around in 72. And that's when Pepsi started to use the slogans, the taste of your generation. I have a poster that you'll see on the video for this, or the taste of the new generation. So in time, this was going to come out, that when you drink Pepsi, you're drinking human kidney cells. It's cannibalism in a can, right? That's the end of it. Of all the flavor enhancers in the world, you know, this is how they think. Of all the ones they can find, they have to have ones made from human beings. So cannibalism. And so this may explain why these Freeman Fly got that video of them using that, because maybe these people instinctually knew this, that there was some kind of a death cult blood ritual cannibalism thing to Pepsi. So anyway, that's the fact of it, okay? No, they don't use aborted fetus cells. Yes, they do use human kidney cells, okay? Now, how is Pepsi going to get out of this, okay? Because this be blown. Well, what you do, if you're a psychopath, is you create a bigger diversion that puts it into the moral framework and kicks the football into a moral ground. So it no longer becomes an ethical or a logical or a scientific thing. It becomes a moral thing, okay? So, you know, an example of that would be women in helicopters, gunships, machine gunning women and children in Iraq. You can't talk about that in a kind of a pacifist way. It's a female empowerment way. And if you have a problem with that, you hate women, because you hate women having the same jobs as men. So they always kick the football into a phony morality. So a group called the Children of God for Life an American right-wing Christian group who we all know are just like all the other cults. They go back to the intelligence services and they'll use it for particular functions. Maintained that Seminex used HEK 293 in a flavor ingredient, and in March 2011 that the organization called for a boycott of major food companies that used this Xenomix aborted fetuses. Now, then it became a big deal. Suddenly, it wasn't about human beings, humans in Pepsi, cannibalism in Pepsi. It was thrown into the world of pro-choice and pro-life and all this kind of thing. So you're then given the classic two-sided paradigm. You either have the lunatics on one side who think that you shouldn't drink Pepsi because it's a sin against God, okay? Because the babies are being murdered for, and then that's incredibly ludicrous. And on the other side, you have the bunch who say that it's a moral thing. Well, it ties in with Roe versus Wade. It ties in with freedom of choice, and it never was a child. It never. So if you're against them using these cells in drinks, then you're against abortion. Then you're a religious nut like the guys on the other side, the Children of Life. The Children of Life say if you drink Pepsi, you're like these crazy liberals. And so the thing is always thrown liberal, conservative, religious, atheist, and in the middle, Pepsi sits there and says everyone, because they're obsessed with the idea that they're human babies, they're fetuses, they forget that they're actual human kidney cells, probably taken from cadavers, okay, of adults, whatever. And so people will say, did you know that Pepsi has aborted fetuses in the drink? Someone goes onto a website and says, no, it doesn't. It doesn't have that at all. And so you're a nutcase. Yeah, you're a nutcase because you're on the same side as the children of God for life. You're a religious loon, a Christian right-wing Babel Bet loon, okay? And then you look up and you find out, well, he's right. But what that does is that creates the smokescreen. That creates the smokescreen for PepsiCo to hide the fact that there are human cells. There is human beings, bits of humans in Pepsi drink as a flavor enhancer. Kidney cells, okay, produced by a company called Xenomix, who give them this flavor enhancer made from human bodies, human kidney cells, human life, human biology. But that's all been lost now because someone says it's aborted fetuses, and then someone says, you're an idiot, it isn't, and here's the proof. And that's the end of it. And I can tell you how all this developed. I can guarantee you that PepsiCo probably whipped up the whole aborted fetus idea in order to throw this appalling monstrosity of using human cells into the world of morality. Now, it gets even sicker, okay? The people who claim that they shouldn't use aborted cells for Pepsi of humans state that they could have easily chosen monkey cells, Chinese hamster ovary cells, insect cells, or other morally attainable human cells of the G protein for taste receptors. Now just listen to that. As if a Pepsi can containing a monkey, a Pepsi can containing a hamster, a Pepsi can containing an insect is okay. You see how they constantly move the goalposts? What's wrong with sugar and caramel? So it's like it's gone from we don't have aborted fetus cells, we have human kidney cells. Hey, but listen, it's a lot better than using monkey cells. This is psychopathic logic, in quotations, 101. This is how they play with us. This is what my work is all about, is to get you to understand how they think. Now, In Forbes magazine, the science writer, Forbes magazine, it's owned by Bono, by the way, Matthew Harper said, the fetus-derived cell line we're talking about was created around the time I was born. This is a 35-year-old technology, and is widely used in cell biology, and there's no way you'll consume them or the cells would cause any health problems. So the fact that these cells were taken 35 years ago still makes it okay. It's fine. They're from 1973. They're fine. They're safe. They're still bits of human beings, but they're safe. Now, I'd like to know who this company, Cenomex, is. They're a small company, and they're using new technologies to create food additives. They can use bits of cells from human bodies to target taste receptors in humans. And they're also in collaboration with Nestle, of course. Who else? Nestle, the cuckoo and the little chocolate company from Switzerland. They don't do any harm. So the whole thing was deliberately, this is how we're played with today. This is why I tell people to throw away your television. When they find out that we're onto them, they throw the ball into the world of fake morality. Every single time. Now Pepsi were then, you get this, the gaslighting just goes into overdrive now, right? Pepsi's relationship with Semonex was justified by saying that by using Semonex products, very careful not to use human biology or human kidney cells or both. They said using Semonex products, it helped them to, wait for it, reduce the sugar in their products. So, you're not going to get fat or bad teeth by drinking something as wicked as sugar. You're going to avoid all that by drinking human kidney cells. Or should they say, Semonex mixed products. And that's the end of it. And that's what it is. And so if you drink Pepsi right now, you're involved in cannibalism. Simple as that. You don't know it, but you are. That's the end of it. And it's time for us to start. This is one of the reasons we have to back away from corporate products, because the psychopaths in charge have they've no decency. They've no compassion. It's just business. It's just, and people say, it's going to come down the line. We're going to get, what was that movie where they were Soylent Green? Well, it's already here, folks. This should we say this controversy with Pepsi have conveniently played down has been around since 1973, which is about the same time the movie Soylent Green came out. It's almost like they laugh at us. If that was taking place in 1973, what the hell is going on now? What the hell is going on now? It's just business. It's just business with these psychopaths. This is how they think, and this is how they always will be. And this is why we have to get wise and back away from these people. Make sure they're nowhere near us. We have to learn to detach ourselves, because their condition is not manifested in their dysfunctionality. It's imposed upon us as social dysfunctionality. Think about that one. This is what a psychopath does. The psychopath doesn't suffer from their condition. They prosper from it. So you have psychopaths in charge. They don't suffer from it. We do. They inflict what should be the negative attributes of their condition upon us. And you will see this over and over again. You will see nothing. If you don't drink soda, don't drink soda pop. Don't. It's the days. Let me tell you, when I used to work in the United States, I used to work in a bar, and I can remember you had those soda guns, and people used to come over from Ireland and they say, "God, it's great here. You get free refills on the soda." But I saw what those and I'm sure people who work in the fast food trade know as well, is what it is. It's a box of pure sugar. It's just like what they call ginger ale is this box of like I don't know what it is. It's like corn syrup, probably mixed with fetuses, whatever. That's just like coloured yellow and then stuck in there next to a bottle of water that's fizzy. And that's what comes out of the gun. And of course it's free. It's garbage. It's absolute rubbish. And this is why it's free, and that's why, this is why they give you these. So just think if you go to like a place like Pizza or whatever it is, I'm not going to name a restaurant, where they give you these free Pepsi refills. This is why. It's absolute garbage. There's no quality at all in that. It's not the same soda that our grandparents drank at the soda fountain, like in those Norman Rockwell paintings and back in the old days. And remember, soda was originally marketed as like a cure for everything from like postnatal depression to menopause to mood swings. It was even, they were told to give it to babies at an early age to help them sleep. They used to put, I'm not kidding you, they used to put, the rubber nipple that you had in the old-fashioned baby's bottles on top of the bottle of Coke and give it to the baby. Or the bottle of 7-Up. If you want soft drinks, you can make your own soft drinks. You can make your own cordials. You can make them from fruit juice. You can make them from elderflowers. You can make beautiful soft drinks from elderflowers and many other things that grow around your house, blackberries and everything else. And this is another thing too I'm quite annoyed about, and it's the idea of sugar. Sugar is always portrayed as this evil thing. Well, let me tell you, as bad as sugar is, the alternatives from aspartame and all the artificial sweeteners to aborted kidney cells is much worse. And this phobia of sugar has been, like the phobia of fats during the 1980s, was deliberately cultivated by big businesses in order to reduce costs for them and bring in more high profitable product ranges that have bigger profit margins for them. That's all that's about. And so it's, I think I'm going to wrap the show up now. We got to all the stories I wanted to talk about. Sorry if I didn't deliver them in my usual sort of flowing style, but the technical problems were awful tonight. But we got, thanks to Paula over there and Neil, we got through the show in the end, and we still got the full 2 hours in. And so I want to thank you for listening in, and I want to thank you for paying attention and sticking with the show. And again, I research these things and look them up for yourself. I'm just a pundit. I'm not giving orders out here. I'm not presenting manifestos. I'm just a pundit. I'm just throwing this stuff out there, and if it flies with you or not, that's okay. As long as, to paraphrase the Neil Young song, keep on rocking in your own free world. Keep on rocking in your own free world. So have a good evening. This has been The Velocity of Now. Me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. We made it through to the end. And thank you for listening. Keep looking at the world. Keep questioning. Keep examining. And feck them if they can't take a joke.
No lizards, no aliens, no nonsense. You are listening to Reality Bytes Radio at www.realitybytesradio.com.
where the grass grows wild, where the winds blow free. Away, away, come away with me, and I'll build you a home in the meadow. Come, come, there's a wondrous land for the hopeful heart, for the willing hand. Come, come, there's a wondrous land, and I'll build you a home in the meadow. The stars, oh how bright they'll shine on a world the Lord must have helped design. The stars, oh how bright they'll shine on that home we will build in the meadow.